Welcome to Star Wars Transmissions. I'm your boy Dan. It's our weekly frickin' Q&A. Second week in a row we're doing a Q&A, and I am very excited for this week's Q&A and the questions that you guys sent me. I got some really good questions that I'm very excited to dive into. Among them, Luthen ship, which we're gonna get into. We're gonna break down my thoughts on Luthen Rael's ballin' ass ship. Now, for our first question, El Pepe asks, "How did the Jedi not notice that their temple was sitting on a dark side mountain?" So let me clarify this. In canon, the Jedi Grand Temple on Coruscant was actually built atop a Sith shrine that had originally been built at the site, which was known as the Shrine in the Depths. And that had been built about 5,000 years before the rise of the Galactic Empire. The Jedi Order was aware that the temple on Coruscant was built on top of a Sith shrine, but only a small number of Jedi were actually aware of this. So the Jedi were aware, but the vast majority, and I mean the vast majority, essentially only the Jedi High Council knew that the Jedi Temple, was built atop a Sith shrine. So now, before I explain why only a small number of Jedi knew that the Jedi Grand Temple was built over a Sith shrine, let's first talk about the site where the Jedi Grand Temple on Coruscant is located and some of its history, because it's definitely important and gives some insight into why the Jedi built their Grand Temple on that site, why the Sith built their shrine at that site as well. So the Sith shrine and then later the Jedi Temple were built over what is called a vergence in the Force that existed at that site. And a vergence, which can also be referred to as a nexus or a locus, you might sometimes see that referred to as. They were unusual yet naturally occurring concentrations of force energy localized around a place, an object, or even a person, right? So Dagobah, where Yoda was in exile, in the Sith cave that Luke winds up going into, that was a vergence in the Force. Anakin himself was a vergence in the Force. So a vergence could be a place, an object, or even a person. Darth Vader's castle, for instance, is another locus, dark side locus. So essentially, the Sith shrine and then the Jedi Temple sat atop this very strong concentration of the Force. And the vergence that the Sith shrine and the Jedi Temple sat atop of, could be power that could be used for benevolent or even malevolent purposes. And so as vergences arose all throughout the galaxy of their own accord, the Jedi and the Sith both sought them out, essentially. So the Jedi and the Sith both sought these vergences out. And during the days of the Old Republic, back during the ancient Sith Empire, the Jedi and the Sith actually fought one another for control over these vergences in the Force, which I think is so dope. I would love if we could explore that more in the current canon, because that's really not something that has been explored a ton in the current canon, how the Jedi and the Sith fought one another for these vergences in the Force. I would love if we start to get some Old Republic stories and content that dive into the Sith and the Jedi fighting for these vergences all throughout the galaxy. That would be so dope. So during the days of the Old Republic, during the Sith Empire, Sith and Jedi are fighting each other for the control of these vergences. And then in regards to the vergence in the Force on Coruscant, the Sith were actually the first to be able to maintain control of that vergence. This screenshot I love. This is from SWOTOR's Star Wars: The Old Republic, which if you've never watched the like cinematics, that trailers that come out for the expansions, they're dope. Totally recommend it. And this is a screenshot from it, and I love this image. So now the Sith are the first to control the vergence and the Force on Coruscant, and they built this enormous black edifice that stood against the Coruscant sky as a symbol of Sith dominance, until it was razed by the Jedi at the end of the Sith War in 5000 BBY. So we're talking 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The Sith wind up, the Jedi wind up razing that Sith edifice, and then they begin to control this vergence in the Force for thousands of years, first through their own shrine, and then eventually through the construction of the Jedi Grand Temple. The Jedi hoped that the placement of their temple over that shrine and the presence of so many light side adepts and Jedi within it would serve to help neutralize and cap the dark power inherent in that shrine, and eventually return the vergence to the light side. So when the Jedi Order constructed their temple, the Sith Shrine, which was on the very lowest level of the Jedi Temple, was underground and was actually covered by a Jedi meditation area. And in the High Republic novel, Into the Dark, which is an excellent novel, totally recommend reading it, really fun. It stated that the Sith Shrine had been locked away for a very long time. Additionally, the shrine was kept apart from the temple at large, hidden from the Jedi themselves, and that few people actually knew the Jedi Temple was built atop a Sith shrine. So again, very few Jedi actually knew that the Jedi Grand Temple was built atop a Sith shrine. When the shrine was needed, the meditation area that covered it would be hastily disassembled. And what we learn in Into the Dark is that what remained of the Sith Shrine was this square dark pit at the center, stairs that had been carved into the stone of that area, and the area was cool, damp, smelled of dirt. And we learn in the novel, too, that the Jedi, during the High Republic, they used the Sith Shrine under the Jedi Temple to perform what was called purification rituals. This space was viewed as sacred and a safe space to perform these taxing rituals that the Jedi would do. So relics and other objects strongly imbued with the dark side of the Force were taken to the Sith Shrine for purification. These rituals were performed to attempt to strip the darkness that imbued whatever specific object they were looking to purify. And then the hope was that these dark side energies that were imbued in those objects, once stripped, would sink into the vergence located in the shrine, dissipate into the cosmic force, and would be made whole, thus purifying them of the benevolence, that was woven into that object. Danny, what is going on? Welcome to the chat. So in Into the Dark, it's not completely explained why only a small number of Jedi are actually aware that the Jedi Grand Temple was built atop of a Sith shrine. But my thought is that the kind of like the same reason why only essentially members of the Jedi High Council could access certain parts of the Holocron Vault or certain parts of the Jedi Archive, such as the Bogan Collection, right? My guess is that the fear was the more individuals that knew about the Sith Shrine under the temple, the more individuals could use that shrine or that information for nefarious activities. And with the Jedi Temple and the Jedi present, the amount of light side energy would help nullify the full malevolent energy given off by that vergence, which is why the Jedi didn't know there was a Sith Shrine that could sense the dark side. Ironically, if memory serves me correctly, I believe that part of the reason why the dark side was clouding members of the Jedi Order's ability to sense Darth Sidious's rise was due to the dark side energy that seeped from the shrine within the depths, which again, that's what the Sith Shrine that lays below the Jedi Temple, that's what it's called, the Shrine in the depths. And I'm pretty sure that that's why we see throughout the Clone Wars and the prequel trilogy, the Jedi keep referring to the dark side seems to be clouding my senses. I believe part of that was because of the Sith shrine that was below the Jedi temple. So to go back to El Pepe's question, wasn't exactly a dark side mountain. It was a Vergence in the Force that the Jedi temple was built atop of, and a Sith shrine that was originally built atop of the Vergence. This was a question when I got it. I was so pumped about this question. I'm like such a nerd for Sith lore, for ancient Jedi lore. This is like the good stuff. This is the sweet stuff that I love learning about in Star Wars. So when I got this question, I was like, hell yes. Cannot wait to dive into this question. This was a really, really fun one. And I wanted to start with this one because, like I said, I'm a nerd for these kinds of questions. All right, so next up, is Luthen's lightsaber weapon on his fighter powered just like a normal lightsaber? So I'm not going to really dive too much into spoilers for episode 11 of Andor. So if you haven't watched Andor, I'm really not going to give away too many spoilers. But if you don't want to be spoiled and you haven't seen episode 11 of Andor, get those booty cheeks out of here. But man, Luthen's ship. Before I specifically answer this question, can we talk about for a second how dope the Fondor is? The Fondor is such a ballin' ass ship. And there's so many cool aspects of this ship that we've kind of gotten some, I don't want to say explanations because we really haven't gotten explanations, but we've kind of seen some of the baller components and tools, so to speak, that are available in the Fondor. So we learn at one point that the ship can calculate a hyperspace route super fast, super fast, which is baller. I mean, think back to moments in Star Wars, like in the original trilogy when Han Solo or some other character, they're being chased and it took them a while for their navicomputer to calculate a safe hyperspace route. The Fondor calculates a hyperspace route super fast. So the navicomputer on the Fondor has to be extremely powerful. Also, the countermeasures that the Fondor have, which are these like mini explosives, are just so freaking cool. I love the sound editing that was used for the countermeasures for the Fondor when they're being launched, and then when they actually hit the Star Destroyer, the cruiser that's chasing the Fondor. So freaking cool. And now the weapon. Avi, how's it going? Welcome to the chat. Glad you're joining us from Dallas, Texas. So now going back to the weapon on the Fondor Hullcraft, which we learn it's a Hullcraft in episode 11. My thought is that the lasers that you see coming out of both sides of the Fondor are not powered like a lightsaber. My thought is it's powered by a similar sort of technology that we've seen in other weapons or other ships in Star Wars. So as an example, one of the first things that came to mind was a B-Wing, right? B-Wing's not going to be powered by a kyber crystal, but it still has some ballin' ass systems that are powering it up. It essentially the B-Wing, there's a few different types of B-Wings, but a B-Wing is going to be powered by let me see, a Slayan and Corporal JZ5G7 power converter. Right, so not using kyber crystals to power it, but it's kind of like a similar sort of laser beam effect that we saw in Luthen's Fondor Hullcraft. The other thing that I thought of, while not exactly similar, or not exactly identical, I should say, kind of similar sorts of technology. The self-propelled heavy artillery turbo laser that we saw used in Attack of the Clones throughout the Clone Wars animated series. Again, not the exact same type of laser that we saw on Luthen's starship, right? Because we go back to that image. Different kind of laser, but I think it's the same sort of technology. A B-Wing was created in 4 BBY, so a year after we're seeing the events of Andor take place. So Andor takes place in 5 BBY. A B-Wing was the first B-Wing was created in 4 BBY. We learned that in Rebels. And the self-propelled heavy artillery turbo laser, they were created in, I think it was it 22 BBY? When does Attack of the Clones take place? I think it's 22 BBY. So that technology has been around for almost 2 decades. That technology of creating these powerful laser beams to use as a weapon. So I don't think the Fondor, while it's a super advanced starship and it has some baller equipment on it, some baller weapons on it, I don't think that the Fondor is using a kyber crystal or is being powered by a kyber crystal to create the weapons that we see coming out of it that it uses. It's a dope technology, whatever it is. I couldn't find anything on the system that is used to power the Fondor or some of its weapons. I imagine that once Andor season 1 ends, there's probably going to be some sort of like visual dictionary or some sort of guide that's going to be released, and we'll probably get some information on the Fondor, its construction, the components, some of the weaponry. And I imagine we'll be able to learn what actually powers the Fondor and what powers this weapon here, which I'm definitely excited to learn about. This was a really great question. I definitely researched this a bunch to see if I could figure this out, but my thought is probably not a kyber crystal, because we have to remember kyber crystals are not easy to come by. That's another thing. They're not easy to come by. Even during the days when the Jedi were still around, the kyber crystals could be found throughout the galaxy, but they were rare. Ilum was a big spot where they could be found. I'm trying to remember where else, but essentially they were hard to come by. And now, during the events of Andor and 5 BBY, the Empire is 100% hoarding kyber crystals for the construction of the Death Star, and they're also maintaining. Essentially, they're not allowing people to travel in and out of Ilum. We learned that in Ahsoka, and we see that in Fallen Order. The Empire is stripping Ilum of kyber crystals, and they are not allowing anyone to travel there, which makes sense. They don't want people that could be Jedi that could be survivors of Order 66 to be able to just travel to Ilum and get a kyber crystal to create a lightsaber, right? So the Empire is 100% controlling kyber crystals at this point, so they're going to be hard to come by. So I think that's another reason why I don't think Luthen's starship, the Fondor, is going to be powered by a kyber crystal. But this is a great question. Dope starship. Again, I can't wait to learn more about this ship. So on to our next question. I was pretty excited about this one. 2-Bit user asks, any explanation in universe why Qui-Gon Jinn never appeared or was mentioned in the original trilogy? I love me some Qui-Gon Jinn. He's an excellent character. I love that so many people appreciate Qui-Gon Jinn, especially I grew up with the prequels. So I appreciate that those of you who grew up with the prequels as well can appreciate some Qui-Gon Jinn. And even if you didn't grow up with the prequels and you just like them, or you just like Qui-Gon Jinn is such a dope character that was, I don't want to say ahead of his time, because it wasn't that he was ahead of his time. He was a Jedi that was around during the wrong era. And what I mean by that is the Jedi during the prequels were very, very rigid and dogmatic in their view of the Force and how they should operate. They're operating, we saw this in Tales of the Jedi, essentially they're kind of puppets of the Senate and then by proxy, Darth Sidious, right? Well, Qui-Gon Jinn, he would go against the Jedi High Council's wishes if he felt that the Force was guiding him in a different direction. If he felt that whatever I'm doing, the Force is guiding me. If that means I have to go against the Jedi High Council's wishes, so be it. The Force is pushing me or guiding me towards whatever decision or action that I'm making. So I love Qui-Gon Jinn, and I appreciate the Qui-Gon Jinn love. Trent, welcome to the chat. Glad you're joining us, talking about Qui-Gon Jinn and why he never appeared or was mentioned in the original trilogy in universe. So obviously the Phantom Menace was created, what was it, like 15 years, 16 years after the Return of the Jedi was released. So the character couldn't have appeared in the original trilogy. But with that said, my thought as to why in universe, the reason is why we don't get Qui-Gon mentioned in the original trilogy is because aside from Qui-Gon being Obi-Wan's master, Luke kind of has no connection to Qui-Gon, right? Also, I think the last thing that Obi-Wan and Yoda wanted to instill in Luke was more rebellious and rash behavior, right? As I mentioned, Qui-Gon was sort of this maverick. He was kind of a rebellious Jedi. His actions and his decision-making were guided by the Force rather than the whims and the will of the Jedi High Council. So I think absolutely there's going to be lessons there to be had for Luke, but my thought is that Obi-Wan and Yoda would rather not talk about this maverick Jedi that was around during the days of this point, the Old Republic, because Luke is still learning to become a Jedi Knight. We know he's at times being tempted by the dark side, so they want to try to minimize Luke's ability to potentially fall to the dark side. So let's not talk about this maverick Jedi that kind of did his own thing and was guided by the will of the Force rather than the whims and the will of the Jedi High Council, because the Yoda and Obi-Wan want Luke to follow their instructions and their directions. Think about in The Empire Strikes Back when Luke has the vision of Darth Vader setting that trap, or excuse me, not setting the trap, that his friends are in trouble. He wants to go and save them. Obi-Wan and Yoda are telling him, hey, that's a trap. You're going to get screwed. Your friends are going to probably die along the way. Don't go. Let your friends die if that's what happens. And Luke goes against their wishes. So Luke's already rash and to some extent rebellious. So yeah, my thought is they're wanting to minimize that sort of behavior in Luke that is already apparent. Mike, welcome to the chat. Glad you're joining us, talking about Qui-Gon. One thing I want to mention, right after Obi-Wan died, he visited Yoda as a Force ghost. In the short story, There Is Another, from a certain point of view. The anthology canon novel, I think it came out, was it 2017? Fantastic book. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it. But if you don't want to read the whole thing, There Is Another is so damn good. Such an excellent short story. And so in that short story, Obi-Wan has died right following his duel with Darth Vader. He goes and visits Yoda as a Force ghost, and he pleads with Yoda to train Luke. But Yoda doesn't want to train Luke. He felt that Luke was headstrong, and that, again, Luke would be rash and could potentially fall to the dark side. So I'd wager that Yoda wants nothing to do with telling Luke about a late Jedi Master that would sometimes go against the wishes of the Jedi High Council. And as for Obi-Wan, he understood how important it was to get Luke's training right, because he thought that the survival of the Jedi Order hinged on Luke becoming a Jedi Knight. Look at what happened to Anakin. Look how much Anakin's fall to the dark side crushed him. So he knew he had to get Luke's training right? So my thought is kind of like parts of the Jedi archives, how parts of the Jedi archives weren't accessible to certain members of the Jedi Order, or they were only accessible to members of the Jedi High Council. My thought is that Obi-Wan, Yoda, they wouldn't want to discuss Qui-Gon and his sort of maverick ways until Luke reached a point where he's a Jedi Knight. They feel confident in his abilities to not necessarily be swayed by the dark side or potentially fall to the dark side. Interestingly enough, there is an issue of the current Star Wars run. Let's make this a little bit larger. What is it? Issue 20, I believe, where Luke actually sees Qui-Gon. So in this part of the main Star Wars run, which is written by Charles Soule, I would highly recommend it if you haven't read it before. It's an excellent comic series. And so at this part in the story, Luke actually finds a Jedi holocron. It's a holocron that Yoda had made. And as he's studying this Jedi holocron, he's able to learn about this vergence in the Force. So going back to what we talked about earlier, this vergence in the Force called the Living Sea of Gazian that was on the mid-rim planet of Gazian. After Luke travels to the temple, he actually sees Qui-Gon. So when you go to the Living Sea of Gazian, essentially what happens is wild. You're consumed by this gigantic sea of mushrooms. The Living Sea of Gazian is this gigantic sea of mushrooms. And essentially, when someone is enveloped by this sea of mushrooms, an imprint of that person at that specific time is taken by the mushrooms, by the Living Sea of Gazian, I should say. And then any Jedi or any person that comes afterward is able to see that individual at the exact moment that their being, so to speak, in the Force, or their presence in the Force, was imprinted on the Living Sea of Gazian. So after Luke travels to Gazian, he's consumed by this gigantic sea of mushrooms, which then allowed him to speak with the High Republic Jedi Master Elzar Mann. Elzar explains the whole Living Sea of Gazian and what's going on. And during this time that Luke is essentially high on Force mushrooms, he has this image of Qui-Gon, of Yoda. Obi-Wan is in the background. Stellan Gios. Oh, why am I drawing a blank on this badass Jedi Master's name? Oh, I'm totally drawing a blank. But yeah, so Luke, even though if he's not fully aware of Qui-Gon and Qui-Gon's teachings and who he was as a Jedi Master, he's aware of or at least has some knowledge of Qui-Gon by the events in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, because Charles Soule's main Star Wars run is taking place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So yeah, so Luke has at least some knowledge of Qui-Gon. I cannot recommend Charles Soule's Star Wars enough to you guys. It has been really, really good. I can't recommend Charles Soule as a Star Wars author enough. He is fantastic. His comics are excellent. His Star Wars novels are excellent. So if you haven't read any Charles Soule, definitely check out some of his stuff. He's an excellent writer, and his stuff has been fantastic. Sonia, welcome to the chat. Wondering what a holocron is. So essentially a holocron, that's a good question. A holocron were these essentially like data storage devices that were used by both the Jedi and the Sith. Let me see. if I could find one quickly for you guys. But they were only accessible by Force users. So for Jedi holocrons, only a Jedi could access them. For Sith holocrons, only a Sith could actually, you know what? Can only a Sith access them? Because now that I say it, I'm thinking that in Rebels, we see Ezra using it, but Ezra is tapping into the dark side. So maybe it's not just a Sith that can access a Sith holocron, but a Sith cannot access a Jedi holocron. But essentially, these holocrons, they were data storage devices. So let me go back to the image of this holocron that Luke finds that Yoda created. So Yoda makes this holocron, and he's going to impart some sort of Jedi lesson or some lesson in the Force for these holocrons. So this way, future Jedi could be able to access that information, and they could actually interact with the person that is making this holocron. So while Yoda at this point is not alive, Luke could actually interact with Yoda in this holocron, which is pretty dope. Can't find one quickly right now, but yeah, holocrons are dope. We've seen them appear in, I'm trying to think. In Rebels, we saw both a Jedi holocron and a Sith holocron. In Fallen Order, we see a holocron. In the Clone Wars, we see the holocrons that appear in the Jedi archives in the holocron vault. But that's a good question. So yeah, going back to Qui-Gon. So I think Qui-Gon, part of it was that he was just kind of too much of a badass Jedi. And at that point in Luke's training, felt that Luke maybe not the best master to give Luke lessons on at this point in time. Sonya, that's kind of a good way to put it. So Sonya says it kind of like a video diary. Yeah, kind of, so to speak. Not necessarily a diary where, I mean, I guess a Jedi or a Sith could use a holocron as sort of a way to tell their life story. You could, absolutely. But that's kind of a good way to think about it. A video diary or a video encyclopedia, a video learning manual, so to speak, on using the Force for both Jedi and Sith. So is the Jedi Temple magical? Kind of, sort of. So we talked about this for our first question. We'll go back to it because I love talking about the Jedi Grand Temple. So the Jedi Grand Temple, it's not necessarily magic. It's built atop a Sith shrine and a Virgins in the Force. So it's very, very strong in the Force. So yeah, so Core asks, Jedi Temple magical is strong in the Force because Starkiller and Padawans had visions of deceased Sith there. So Starkiller is from The Force Awakens. That's Legends. So in Legends, it's kind of different than in canon. In canon, as I mentioned, the Jedi Temple is built over a Sith shrine. Sith shrine was built over a Virgins in the Force. So essentially, the Jedi Grand Temple was built over a Virgins and the Force. And so it was very, very strong in the Force, and it could be used for both benevolent as well as malevolent purposes. All right, so let's keep them moving. This question made me crack up. Can Darth Vader tiptoe? If he can't, can you explain that? I would like to know. But yeah, my thought is our boy can tiptoe. But why would he? Right? I'm sure he has the capability of tiptoeing when he wants to, but does he really need to? I mean, our boy is a badass. And how often does Darth Vader really need to slink around? You know, he's not really one for slinking and trying to sneak up on people. But yeah, I'm sure Darth Vader could tiptoe. Also, this GIF just made me laugh when I searched for it. I wanted to find a video of Darth Vader dancing, and I found this GIF. I was like, oh my God. Yeah, this is great. All right. On to our next question. Is Rey really the last Jedi? I don't think so. I don't think Rey is going to be the last Jedi. At the end of The Rise of Skywalker, right, we see Rey, and we know that Finn is Force sensitive. So my thought is that it stands to reason Rey is going to want to train Finn. And while we haven't gotten that, I don't believe we've gotten that in canon yet. We did see Rey actually train Finn in the Star Wars holiday special that came out last year. That's not canon. It was kind of a fun sort of holiday story. Was it Lego? I think it was Lego, now that I think about it. But yeah, in that special, we see Rey train Finn. We know from other canon sources that, although it's not explicitly stated in The Rise of Skywalker that Finn is Force sensitive, that was the message he kept trying to tell Rey, that he's Force sensitive. So I think that, yeah, Rey would train him, because again, at the end, the implication at the end of Rise of Skywalker is that Rey was going to be that spark for a new Jedi Order and would go on to rebuild the Jedi Order. We also talk about for a second here, let me move this over. I love Rey's lightsaber hilt. I wish we got to see her build this hilt, or see her use this hilt for the majority of The Rise of Skywalker. What a dope freaking hilt. And I love too when it lights up, you could see, like, you can kind of see right here how it's got these holes in the emitter, that when she ignites the lightsaber and turns it on, that like the blade of her lightsaber seems to quickly turn colors before it settles on like yellow or gold. So some people have theorized that, hey, maybe her lightsaber has the ability to change the color of its blade depending upon whomever is wielding it, which is so dope. It kind of goes into what we're going to talk about in a second, or what I want to talk about in a second. But all right, let me move this back over. I think the implication is that after The Rise of Skywalker, she's going to rebuild a new Jedi Order. And I have to imagine that even if she's like, I don't know if I want to rebuild a Jedi Order, Force Ghost Luke is going to visit her, and he's going to be talking to her about restarting the Jedi Order and rebuilding the Jedi Order. You know, think about what Luke tells Kylo Ren when he force projects himself to buy the Resistance time to escape, that, no, I'm not the last Jedi. Although he's saying Rey's going to be the last Jedi, the implication is that Rey's going to be able to, as long as there's a Jedi around, the Jedi Order is not dead. Right? So Force Ghost Luke is going to be able to visit Rey, and if Rey is doubting her abilities to rebuild the Jedi Order, or her desire to rebuild the Jedi Order, I think Luke would be there to help guide her and to potentially persuade her into rebuilding the Jedi Order. I think the same thing of my boy Yoda, my homeboy Yoda. We know he could be a Force ghost, right? So I'm sure Yoda and Luke, Force Ghost Luke, could appear to Rey and try to persuade her to rebuild the Jedi Order. So I think if Rey's doubting herself, Luke, Yoda, they would be there to guide her. And Finn, if she trains Finn, they're close with one another. They would be able to build the Jedi Order together, which I think would be really cool. Now, that's my thought in terms of like canon and in universe, in terms of stories that us fans will be able to get. I think at some point there's going to be new Star Wars stories that are going to have to delve into what came after the Rise of Skywalker. Did Rey rebuild the Jedi Order? Was she the last Jedi? Right? She can't be the last Jedi, right? I mean, we know at some point Star Wars is going to have to go beyond the events of the Rise of Skywalker. I guess they don't have to, but I think if Lucasfilm doesn't, that would be kind of a bummer. There's already rumors that Lucasfilm is considering to create stories that will take place after the events of the Rise of Skywalker. So there's rumors circulating that Damon Lindelof is creating a Star Wars film that's set after the events of the Rise of Skywalker. And if that's the case, you have to imagine there's going to be Jedi in that story. For those of you that don't know who Damon Lindelof is, he created the Watchmen miniseries on HBO, which is so freaking spectacular. I love that miniseries. It is great. And when I saw the rumors circulating that Damon Lindelof is going to be creating a Star Wars film, I was super freaking pumped. And then when I saw that it's going to take place after the events of Rise of Skywalker, I was totally on board, super pumped. There's also rumors circulating that Kathleen Kennedy and Dave Filoni spoke with the studio that created the Star Wars Vision short, The Ninth Jedi, which please let this rumor be true, because The Ninth Jedi is so freaking dope. I love The Ninth Jedi. I can't even begin to tell you guys how many times I have gone back and rewatched The Ninth Jedi. If like I'm eating something quickly, or I got 10 minutes to kill and I don't want to turn on a show, or I don't want to grab my phone and mess around on the internet, I'll pop on The Ninth Jedi, and just so I have something to do for like 10 minutes. I have watched it so many times. It is spectacular. And it's so dope. We have no clue when The Ninth Jedi would take place after the events of the Rise of Skywalker. But I think that is such a great idea. Like, hey, the Jedi Order is essentially gone at this point. Not only is the Sith seem to be controlling the galaxy, but it's like a slew of Sith, kind of like what we were talking about with the Old Republic. And now there's this dope Jedi Master working to rebuild the Jedi Order, which, guys, Margrave Juro is one of the dopest looking Jedi. I've mentioned this in streams that my wife Danielle and I have done, some of my other videos. I'm all about, if Star Wars was real, I would be a Jedi that dresses like a Sith. I would have an outfit that looks like a Sith, but I'd be a benevolent character. I'd be a Jedi. And Margrave Juro to me is like exactly the kind of Jedi I would be. Just this badass that dresses awesome, looks villainous, but is not, and is a good individual. That would be me. So I would love if we got a continuation of The Ninth Jedi, whether it's live action or even if it's animation. I don't care. The studio that created The Ninth Jedi is called Production IG, and I think they crushed it. I love the animation style in this short. I love the action and how it's depicted. I love the music is so good. I was watching The Ninth Jedi today, actually, and I was just like captivated by the music. And every time I watch it, I really enjoy the music, but I was like really paying attention to the music today. Just captivated by it. It sounds so great. It sounds so Star Wars, yet different from what we've gotten in other Star Wars stories. Just everything about The Ninth Jedi is freaking spectacular. So yeah, sign me up. I want to know more about Margrave Juro. I want to know more about Cara. I can't remember. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank on the other character's name. I know there's the one character, Ethan. Ethan's the guy that we see think he's the first character we see in the episode. He's another Force user that comes to the temple at High Islan and at the behest of Margrave Juro so that he could get a lightsaber and train with a Jedi Master, or train with a Master. So at the end of the short, Ethan, Cara, it's Margrave Juro, and then there's like that other person. I don't know what species they are, but originally they're fighting against Margrave, Cara, and Ethan, and then eventually they wind up deciding to join up with Margrave, Juro, Cara, and Ethan. I love too how originally that character's lightsaber is red, and then we see them as the episode progresses and as the fight progresses, their lightsaber turns from red to purple, which is so dope. And I mentioned this earlier with Rey's lightsaber, how it kind of changes color quickly before it settles on gold or yellow. I think it's so dope that if we get a story that's set in this 9th Jedi time period, that kyber crystals could be tempered with, so that the lightsabers that are using those crystals can change, the blade of those sabers could change color depending upon the wielder of that lightsaber. I think that's so cool. I love the idea of bleeding kyber crystals. I think that's so dope. But I also really like the idea that depending upon someone's connection with the Force and how they connect with their kyber crystal, I like the idea that your crystal could change from, let's say, red if you're harboring these dark side emotions, to purple as you're sort of torn between the light and the dark. And maybe it changes to green after that, or blue. Either way, dope. So yeah, I think at some point Lucasfilm is going to release stories that take place after the events of The Rise of Skywalker. I think it's a matter of time before we see that happen. Don't know when, but I think it's a matter of time. And when it does, I'll be very happy for that to happen. But I also think that we need to see stories, or at least I shouldn't say we need to. I want there to be stories that take place after the Rise of Skywalker that dive into the Jedi, the Sith, the Force, lightsabers. As much as I love Andor, I think it's been spectacular. But I wanna have stories about the Jedi, the Sith, the Force. That's the stuff I nerd over about, and that's the stuff a lot of us Star Wars fans get super excited for. So I think at some point, Lucasfilm is going to have to introduce some new Jedi that are around either during Rey's life or after. I think it's just a matter of time before that happens. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you want to see stories that take place during Rey's life after the events of The Rise of Skywalker? Do you prefer to see stories that take place, let's say, 100 years after Rey's life, 200 years after Rey's life, or maybe even longer than that into the future? I think it could be dope either way, whatever, as long as, I think the thing is, the story's got to be good. Things need to be planned out. We can get, Vision showed us, we can absolutely get dope stories that are about the Jedi and the Sith and the Force that don't have to be connected to the Skywalker saga or those characters. The High Republic is another great example of that. Even though that takes place a couple hundred years before the events of the Skywalker saga, we Star Wars fans can get down with characters that we're unfamiliar with, that didn't appear in the Skywalker saga. If the stories are good, if the characters are complex and they're good characters, we can definitely appreciate those kinds of stories and characters. So Core says, yes, see new ways in which Force can be used. Yeah, I agree. I have been reading, I've been slow to finish Star Wars Legacy. It's a Legends comic series that came out, was it like 2007? In the mid-aughts. Not the best. It's cool. It's got its moments that are really cool. It has moments, though, where I'm like, it's kind of whack. But I like the fact that it takes place about 150 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. I think one of the things I don't like about it, it hinges very much on characters from the original trilogy and the Skywalker name, which I don't like. It's one of the things that I love about the High Republic. The High Republic, you get characters like Yoda, Yariel Poof. I'm trying to think if there's some other characters. Terra Sunube, I believe Terra Sunube's been mentioned in the High Republic. We get some familiar characters, we get some familiar things from the Skywalker saga, but it's not hanging on to Skywalker saga characters. It's its own unique thing, which I absolutely love. The High Republic has been such a breath of fresh air for Star Wars. I can't recommend the High Republic enough. It's been spectacular. So yeah, Core, I agree. Definitely can get down with new Star Wars stories that take place after the events of the rise of Skywalker. As long as the story is good, and whether that features Rey in it or not, I could be down with either. But let me know what your thoughts are. What would you like to see? Would you like stories set after the rise of Skywalker? Would you rather Lucasfilm to not even dive into those waters? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But I think that's a good spot to end it, guys. That's my last question. I'm really enjoying these weekly Q&As. This is the second one that we're doing. The questions that I've gotten so far have been really fun. When I've gotten them each time, I'm like, oh, hell yes, these are great questions. I can't wait to nerd out over these questions with fellow Star Wars fans. So I'm going to keep doing these Q&As as long as you guys are sending me questions to answer. I'm going to keep doing these Q&As because they're really fun for me. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions that maybe you want me to answer for next week or in future Q&As. You could leave those questions down below and maybe I'll answer those next week or in a future Q&A. This week for us Americans, Thursday is Thanksgiving. I have family coming to town to spend the holidays with. So I'm going to try as best as I can to do a live stream breaking down Andor, the season finale. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it yet or not, but I'm going to try, even if it's like a 20-30 minute live stream, just to give my thoughts on the episode. So I'm going to try. So that's hopefully still going to happen for Wednesday. I don't think Danielle is going to be able to join me, sadly, but I'm hoping that I can do it at least. If not, probably Saturday, I think, maybe Sunday. Going to continue to do live stream of playing Fallen Order, which has been really fun. This is my second time doing a full walkthrough of Fallen Order, which that is a fantastic freaking game. Can't recommend that enough. And then next week, we'll do another Q&A. If you have not already, please like this video and subscribe to Star Wars Transmissions. Hit that notification bell if you haven't, so you don't miss out on any future Q&As. And with that said, my friends, may the Force be with you and stay nerdy.